Okay, so let's talk about the book of 2nd Samuel. We all kind of know the story of King David, right? The epic rise, the tragic fall. It's one of the most famous stories out there. But what if I told you that what we think of as the main story is just the surface? What if there's a much deeper narrative hidden just underneath? No, seriously, take a second. When you hear that name, King David, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it the young shepherd boy, the hero who took down Goliath? Or do you jump straight to the powerful king? Or maybe the man who made a catastrophic mistake? Whatever it is, just hold that thought. And yeah, for most of us, 2 Samuel is basically the King David highlight reel, isn't it? You've got his big rise to power, all the military wins, and then, yep, that tragic fall with Bathsheba. And look, all of that is in there, it's all true. But it's not the point, not even close. This right here, this phrase, is the secret key to unlocking the entire book. We're going to see this pattern over and over again. What you think the story is about is actually pointing to a much deeper, more important reality. So, you ready? Let's dive into our first example. All right, our first one starts right at the beginning. David gets anointed king when he's just a teenager, but then he waits for about 15 years before he actually sits on the throne. Why the huge delay? You know, it's so easy for us to see a delay and think, well, I guess God changed his mind. We assume delay means denial. But the story flips that completely on its head. This wasn't punishment, it was preparation. This was God's development program. David spent all those years in the wilderness, not being forgotten, but being forged into a king who would depend on God, not on a crown. So David is finally king. He captures the key city of Jerusalem. Now what? What's the first move for any new king? Build up the army? Fortify the city? Nope. David does something completely unexpected. This is so important, you guys. His very first act wasn't about military power or building his palace. It was about bringing the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's literal presence, right into the center of national life. He understood something fundamental. A kingdom centered on God's presence is way more secure than one centered on power. For him, it was presence before power. But bringing the Ark to Jerusalem wasn't exactly a smooth ride. There's this story that, well, it's pretty shocking. A guy named Uzzah sees the Ark start to wobble on a cart. He does the natural thing, he reaches out to steady it, and bam, he's struck dead on the spot. I mean, to our modern ears, that just sounds brutal, a massive overreaction from God. So, on the surface, it looks like God overreacted, but the story is revealing a critical truth about God's holiness. Think of it like this. God's presence is like pure energy, like the sun. You can't just casually handle it. There were specific instructions. It was supposed to be carried by priests with this immense reverence. By just grabbing it, Uzzah treated God's presence like a common object to be managed. It was a terrifying lesson. God's presence isn't to be controlled. It's to be revered. And when the Ark finally gets to Jerusalem, David is dancing with everything he's got, even stripping off his royal robes. It's easy to see that as just an emotional outburst, right? But again, the text reveals something deeper. This was an intentional act of worship. David wasn't losing control. He was publicly laying down his crown, showing everyone that even the king of Israel is just a servant before the one true king. Now, David's focus on God's presence leads directly to the absolute heart of the entire book, a promise, a covenant that will change the course of history. God makes a covenant with David. He promises him that his family line will produce a king whose kingdom will last forever. Now, this is way bigger than just a pat on the back for David. This is the prophetic backbone for the rest of the Bible, pointing straight toward the Messiah, Jesus, who would be the ultimate fulfillment of that promise. We see this covenant-keeping heart in action when David seeks out Mephibosheth, the last living relative of his old enemy, King Saul. We might read this and think, what a nice guy, showing pity on him. But it's so much more than that. David had made a sacred promise, a covenant, with his friend Jonathan, Saul's son, years before. This wasn't charity. This was covenant loyalty. And this story becomes this beautiful picture for all of us. Think about it. Mephibosheth was broken, he was from an enemy family, and he had nothing to offer the king. Yet he gets a permanent seat at the king's table for life. Why? Not because he earned it, but because of a promise. It's a perfect picture of grace. Of course, we can't talk about 2 Samuel without talking about David's greatest failure. We tend to frame the sin with Bathsheba as just a sudden moral failing, a moment of weakness. But the text shows the problem started way before that. It began when David, the king, the warrior, decided to stay home from war. He abandoned his post. He walked away from his calling. His sin wasn't just a moral slip. It was a total collapse of his leadership. So after David tries to cover everything up by having Bathsheba's husband killed, God sends the prophet Nathan to confront him. But Nathan is brilliant. He doesn't just barge in, pointing a finger. He tells the king a story about a rich man who steals a poor man's only beloved lamb.
And David, listening to this, becomes furious at the injustice. He declares that the rich man should die. And in that moment, Nathan delivers one of the most powerful lines in the Bible. He just looks him in the eye and says, "You are the man." The story completely disarmed David's defenses and forced him to confront his own sin.
But Nathan tells David that the sword will never depart from your house. We often read that and think of it as a curse from God. But it's better understood as God revealing the natural harvest of David's choices. When you plant seeds of violence and deception, that's what you reap. God's grace forgives David, absolutely, but it doesn't just erase the painful consequences of his actions. So after all this, after the rise, the fall, and the painful consequences, what is the story of 2 Samuel really about? And here it is, the crucial point. We thought this was the story of King David. It's not. It's the story of God's unwavering, unstoppable covenant faithfulness. David is a central character, absolutely, but he is not the hero of this story. The hero is God, who patiently works through human success and human failure to accomplish his ultimate plan. So when you look beneath the surface, these are the themes that just shine through. It's a story that values God's presence over any human position, covenant loyalty over personal charisma, and authentic worship over religious performance. And it shows us that God's timing is always better than our ambition, and His grace is always, always bigger than our failure. Because in the end, David's kingdom, for all its glory, was temporary and flawed. It was a human kingdom. But its real purpose was to be a signpost, a shadow pointing forward to the perfect, eternal kingdom of the Messiah that was promised in that covenant all those years ago. And that leaves us with a final thought. If the surface story of this famous king actually had a much deeper purpose, what about our own lives? What delays or failures or unexpected turns might be part of a bigger story that we just can't see yet, one where God is the true hero? That's the story beneath the story.